Berlin Alexanderplatz, Berlin Alexanderplatz. Yes, we're still watching this, but it's getting better. Part 2. Hello there, CriterioNate here. This is part 2 of my review of number 411, Rainer Werner Fassbender's Berlin Alexanderplatz. Today we're going to discuss parts 3 through 5 and that. So anyway, as we left, so as you know, if you haven't seen the first part, again, what I'm doing is I'm just basically serializing this. Today we're doing disc 2. Tomorrow we're going to do disc 3, disc 4, disc 5, disc 6, disc 7, and so forth. Disc 7 will be on Thanksgiving, the 23rd, I guess? November 23rd, yeah. So that'll be the last day when we do I guess just the supplements we'll do that day. So anyway, what else? So let's talk about it. So part 3. So as we know, Franz Bieberkopf is the guy who got released from prison, and he's trying to figure out his place in Germany, in Berlin. And the only way he can stay in Berlin is if he keeps himself employed. And so he's just basically that's what we're kind of more or less left off. So part 3. Takes off right. Part 3 starts right where part 2 ends, with Franz and Lena, his girlfriend, on the street. And let me give you the titles here. Part 3 is titled, they always have cool titles, Ein Hammer auf den Kopf kann dein Ziel verletzen. A hammer blow to the head can injure the soul. And so what happens is, Franz is explaining almost the scuffle he got with Dresden or whatever, when he's screaming in the bar. And so he blames Lena for saying, oh, I didn't want to sell, for making him sell the newspaper, that Nazi newspaper. And so Lena comes up with this idea. He says, oh, I have an uncle named Otto who could help, who has an idea. And so they bring him to his uncle, to her uncle, and I guess he recognizes him as an ex-con that he met in prison, I think, but he still regards him as a good friend, a good guy. And so Otto sets him up with a gig selling shoelaces from door to door. And so Franz, one day he goes to his first customer, he knocks on the door, and this woman opens the door. She's in black, she's a widow, and her husband, and she explains that her husband looks remarkably like Franz, so she ends up inviting him in for a cup of coffee, and explaining that he left his stuff there, and I guess he apparently I guess they got it on. Because she was so attracted to Franz because of his resemblance to her late husband. So he tells Otto this, and he explains that he left his stuff there. Otto tries to go to the widow's place to get his stuff, and at first she's totally resentful because she can tell that it doesn't fly, and so he ends up basically trying to rape her, and she throws him out. Franz tries to come by and gets turned away because of Otto's misdoings, and so he ends up vanishing. Lena gets worried about Franz, and so he and Mech confront Otto about his whereabouts, about Franz's whereabouts. Otto gives him a story, but Mech can see right through it. Otto finds Franz in this flop house, and Franz and Otto almost have a confrontation. And Otto eventually, Mech eventually finds out where Franz is from Otto. However, by the time Mech and Lena get to the flop house, Franz is gone. And so Mech tells Lena that she can stay with him for the time being, and that's how part 3 ends. Part 4 was probably one of the more confusing parts, probably one of the more introspective parts, I guess. Ein Handvoll Menschen in der Tiefe der Stille, a handful of people in the depths of silence. By this point, so basically this episode is basically just Franz is drunk, and he's watched over by this guy, Bauman, who I guess works across the street. He's like a hospital orderly who works across the street from the that Prisoner's Aid, that group that's keeping him out of trouble. So basically, they play cards. He calls him Job. Bauman calls Franz Job. Franz calls Bauman Satan, and they have a very religious discussion about things and all that. And Franz basically wanders the street drunk. He ends up running into he ends up sort of reuniting with an old girlfriend of his, Eva. Well, I guess when he was a pimp, he was at some point she prostituted herself for him or something. I'm still trying to figure out their relationship. I mean, it's sort of, I guess that's the vague concept of it. So at one point he's so drunk that he ends up confessing his sins. He goes to a church and ends up confessing his sins to who he thinks is a priest, who is actually a coal worker who's just passing by. And he ends up running into the guy who sells sex magazines in the subway. And he finds out that Mech is now selling clothes on the street. And so they reunite. And so that's basically how part 4 ends. And he tells him, oh, Lena's staying with me. Part 5. Ein Schnitter mit der Gewalt vom lieben Gott. God, I hope I'm getting this right. A reaper with the power of our Lord. This part's a little more straightforward. Also, it's an interesting. So Franz and Mech are at a bar and they're discussing this guy Pooms, who is, I guess, like some gangster guy, and he's like got these illegal goings on, and his partner Reinhold. And so anyway, Franz and Eva reunite, and they have sex. And later on, Franz and Reinhold meet on the street, and Reinhold has a woman, Franze, I guess. It's basically Franz with an E, so I'm not sure. Franzi, I'm not sure how to exactly pronounce that. And I kept missing it in the story. And so Reinhold is kind of sick of her, and so he basically wants Franz to take her off his hands, and so he basically invites Franz over and seduces her, and they have sex, and so she becomes his girlfriend, and then again he meets Franz, and then Franz meets Reinhold again on the street, and this time he's got a girlfriend, Silly, and he wants to do the same thing. He wants him to do the same thing with Silly. He's getting sick of her because all Silly wants to do is go shopping and all that. And Franz is kind of reluctant at first, but he eventually relents, and he basically picks a fight with Franzi and gets her thrown out. And Silly comes by, does the same thing. Well, first he asks the guy who's selling sex magazines if he'll take Silly off of Reinhold's hands. He doesn't. He says he kind of prefers the. He says something about like preferring the like the silence to the chaos and all that. And so anyway, Silly ends up coming by. He seduces Franz. Franz seduces Silly, and they end up having sex, and she starts living with him. And by this point, Franz is getting sick of it, and he wants him to do it again with his latest girlfriend, Trudy, or something. And he confesses. This time, he confesses it to Silly what he's doing. And he basically says, first he's like, oh, let me do this for him, and then I guess he really likes Silly because she's a dancer, and she's actually really attractive too. There's a very humorous scene where he walks into his apartment and Silly's dancing, and he starts doing like a kind of a Charleston kind of thing, or like I forget the dance. I don't know. It's not the Charleston. It's like kind of he just starts dancing, and I don't know. That was a very, very funny moment for me personally, just watching Franz dance like that. So anyway, he tells Silly what he's doing, and Silly gets really upset. And but at the same time, you know, he basically tries to console Silly and tells him that he's not gonna do this. He's gonna tell Trudy what Reinhold's doing, and they're gonna confront Reinhold and get him away. And so she's happy with this, and then they collapse on the floor and bang, and and that's basically part 5. So that's basically disc 2. I'm liking this. I am actually honestly liking this. I think it's the whole, again, TV series, short. I sometimes can have a bad attention span, so having shorter episodes. The storyline is a little confusing in parts. There are obviously better episodes or parts. Some parts make more sense to me. The ones that are more plot driven are often, the ones that I think Fassbender's treatment of sex so far is way more enjoyable than with, again, with the BRD trilogy or Ali Fears of the Soul and all that. So, and that just might be, the fact that I didn't mention this before, but it's the Berlin Alexanderplatz is based on a book written by the author Alfred Doblin. I guess I'll probably check that out sometime. See if I can find a pressing of that from my library or something. And yeah, that's basically all I got for today. So again, enjoying this so far. And yeah, that's it for me. Thanks for watching. Again, we'll be back tomorrow for disc 3, which contains parts 6 through 8. So yeah, we'll just get to the next 3 parts tomorrow. Hope you're enjoying this. Let me know what you think down below, and we'll see you guys tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.